Little girl in my house. The cold tendrils of night had long since wrapped themselves around the small house, making the silence even more profound. Richard, lost in the depth of a dreamless slumber, was slowly roused by an unfamiliar sound. A gentle humming, fragile and delicate, found its way to his ears, drawing him out from the heavy weight of sleep. It sounded like a lullaby, a tune from a distant memory, full of nostalgia and melancholy. The room was dim, painted with the soft luminescence of the moonlight filtering through the gaps in the curtains. As Richard's consciousness sharpened, he hesitated for a moment. The sound was enchanting, yet it felt out of place in the solitude of his home. Pushing his heavy duvet aside, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed, feet touching the cool wooden floor. Every creak of the steps and every rustle of his nightshirt seemed amplified as he cautiously descended the staircase. The melody grew stronger, more pronounced. He approached the living room, and the sight that greeted him sent a shiver down his spine. There, bathed in the soft glow of the room's solitary lamp, sat a little girl. Golden curls, reminiscent of sunlit honey, cascaded down her back. She was deeply engrossed in singing to a porcelain doll cradled in her arms. The doll's glassy eyes stared back vacantly, yet the girl treated it with a gentle reverence. As Richard took another step into the room, the floorboard beneath him groaned softly, betraying his presence. The girl's humming ceased abruptly. Slowly she raised her head, revealing a pair of piercing azure eyes. They regarded Richard with a mix of curiosity and something he couldn't quite place. The silence that stretched between them was interrupted by her innocent smile, revealing a set of perfectly white teeth. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Richard felt an overwhelming urge to protect this mysterious child. A magnetic force seemed to emanate from her, drawing him closer. The questions that should have been foremost in his mind, who was she? How did she get inside? Seemed to fade away, overshadowed by a burgeoning need to care for her. The very thought of alerting the authorities or questioning her presence seemed distant, almost unfathomable. The child, with her innocent demeanor, had inexplicably become the center of his world in just a few moments. Every dawn brought new mysteries and routines into Richard's life. The once solitary and predictable rhythm of his existence was now punctuated by the laughter and whims of the little girl. The sun would find him in the kitchen, carefully preparing a breakfast of pancakes drizzled with maple syrup or scrambled eggs with a side of toast. The girl's taste was peculiar, leaning heavily towards sweet and tangy flavors, but he catered to her preferences diligently. As the days blended together, Richard's home slowly transformed into a colorful haven of toys and childhood wonders. The living room carpet became a sea of dolls, building blocks, and puzzles, each one chosen with a loving hand. On weekends, they'd venture out to local boutiques, where he'd let the little girl pick dresses that shimmered with vibrant hues or had fanciful patterns of unicorns and stars. The toy store became their favorite haunt, with Richard indulging her every whim, from stuffed teddy bears to intricately designed dollhouses. However, Richard's friends and family couldn't help but raise their eyebrows at the sudden presence of this enigmatic child. Phone calls turned into interrogations. Who is she? Where did she come from? Are you her guardian? They'd probe. But Richard, ensnared by the child's mystical charm, would offer nothing more than ambiguous replies. She's a distant relative, he'd say, or just someone I'm looking after for a while. The worry in their voices was palpable, but Richard's mind seemed miles away, cocooned in a world where only he and the little girl existed. One fateful afternoon, the pantry ran low on the girl's favorite snacks. Richard, ever the doting caretaker, decided to make a quick trip to the nearby grocery store. As he drove, the bright sun filtering through the trees cast a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow on the road. But then, an unforeseen sensation gripped him. A wave of dizziness, fierce and sudden, washed over Richard. It felt as though invisible hands were squeezing his heart, making each breath a Herculean effort. The trees and houses around him blurred into a dizzying swirl of colors. Panic set in, but before he could react, a crushing darkness descended upon him, plunging his world into an abyss. The transition between unconsciousness and awareness was a slow, arduous one for Richard. His senses first picked up on the sanitized scent that hung heavily in the air, a mixture of disinfectant, fresh linens, and an underlying note of sterile coldness. With effort, he peeled his eyelids open, immediately squinting against the harsh artificial lights above. His surroundings gradually came into focus. Towering white walls enclosed him, interrupted only by monitors that blinked and whirred, casting an eerie glow. The rhythmic beeping of machines became more pronounced, each pulse a reminder of his tether to this unfamiliar place. Before he could gather his wits, the door swung open, and a man in a white coat entered, concern etched deeply into his furrowed brow. Richard tried to speak, but his throat was parched, rendering his voice a raspy whisper. The doctor quickly poured a glass of water from a pitcher on the nightstand, helping Richard take a few sips before launching into an explanation. "Mr. Richard," the doctor began gently, "you've had quite an ordeal. You were brought in unconscious, and our initial assessments reveal that you've been suffering from a severe neurological disorder. This disorder has likely caused intense and vivid hallucinations." Richard's mind raced, attempting to string together fragments of memories. The little girl, her laughter, their shared moments. It felt so real, so tangible. But the doctor's words gnawed at his understanding of reality. Days turned into a blur as Richard grappled with this revelation. The hospital's psychiatric team counseled him, and with each session, the line between reality and illusion seemed to blur further. The consensus was that the little girl, the one with golden curls and piercing azure eyes, the one he'd devoted his every waking moment to, was nothing more than a byproduct of his fragmented mind. Yet, as Richard lay in his hospital bed each night, staring at the monotonous ceiling, a nagging doubt persisted. Every whisper of the wind, every shadow that danced on the walls seemed to carry traces of her lullaby, of her presence. Was it truly just a figment of his imagination? Or was there a deeper, more sinister reality that he was yet to confront? The journey back home felt longer than usual. Each turn of the road and every rustling leaf seemed to amplify Richard's anxiety. The heavy weight of uncertainty and dread settled in his chest, making every breath feel laborious. As he approached his home, memories of the hospital's sterile environment and the doctor's words seemed a lifetime away. With trembling hands, Richard inserted the key into the lock, its metallic click echoing in the evening stillness. A chill ran through him, not from the cool air, but from a creeping sensation that he wasn't alone. As the door creaked open, the soft strains of a lullaby drifted towards him. The very same tune that had once been a source of comfort now filled the air with foreboding. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to turn on his heel and never look back. But a deeper, more primal need to confront his fears and seek answers propelled him forward. Taking a deep breath, he summoned every ounce of courage and ventured into the dimly lit hallway. But nothing could have prepared him for the scene that unfolded before his eyes. The once cozy living room was draped in shadows, and in its center stood a figure that bore little resemblance to the sweet, innocent child he remembered. Gone were the golden curls and the cherubic face. In their place loomed a monstrous being that defied description. Its towering form seemed to constantly shift and ripple, as if made of liquid darkness. The skin, or what appeared to be skin, changed hues like the turbulent surface of an oil slick. Most unsettling were the eyes. They were massive, taking up much of the creature's face, and they pulsed with a malevolent glow, a deep, fiery red that seemed to pierce straight into Richard's soul. The lullaby, which the entity continued to hum, was no longer the gentle tune he recalled. Its melody was twisted and warped, each note dripping with menace. The once soft and comforting song now resonated with chilling discordance, adding to the nightmarish tableau. Frozen in place, Richard struggled to comprehend the transformation, his mind racing to piece together the reality of the creature that stood before him and the memories of the little girl he had come to care for. The oppressive weight of terror gripped Richard's heart, causing it to thunder violently against his ribcage. Each beat resonated with the haunting realization that what stood before him was no mere figment of his imagination. No neurological disorder could conjure up something so vivid, so palpably sinister. The cold air around him prickled his skin, and every instinctive sense told him that the monstrous entity was not just a part of his fractured psyche. It was flesh and blood, or whatever material such an otherworldly being might be composed of. The deep red eyes of the creature seemed to follow him, assessing and analyzing with an intelligence that belied its monstrous form. Richard's thoughts spiraled, trying desperately to find an anchor in the midst of his panic. Why was this happening? What was the purpose of its deceit? Had it adopted the visage of a little girl to exploit human emotions, to ensnare him in a web of trust and vulnerability? The thought that he had been manipulated, that his compassion and nurturing instincts had been weaponized against him, was a gut punch. Or perhaps there was a deeper, more unfathomable reason behind its actions, a cosmic game or experiment that he could barely begin to comprehend. Each step backward felt like an eternity, the distance between him and the creature seemingly unchanging, as if he was trapped in a nightmarish loop. Richard's mind raced, darting from one thought to another, searching for a plan, a way out. The doors, windows, any escape route that would lead him away from the looming terror in his living room. His past experiences, the warnings of friends and family, and the doctor's diagnoses all seemed to blur together. The line between reality and fantasy, certainty and doubt, was thinner than ever. But one thing was irrefutably clear. Richard was in grave danger, and he needed to act, and fast. The very air in the room grew thick and heavy, suffused with a sense of imminent danger. The creature's growl rumbled through the space, a sound so low and visceral that it resonated with the deepest, primal parts of Richard's brain, awakening a fight-or-flight response honed by centuries of evolution. But this was no ordinary adversary. This was something that defied the laws of nature, an alien being with capabilities beyond human understanding. The days that stretched ahead of Richard would not only be a test of his physical endurance, but also his mental fortitude. Each sunrise brought with it new challenges, new revelations, and a deeper understanding of the creature and its intentions. As he sought ways to understand, and possibly communicate with the alien, Richard delved into ancient texts, consulted with experts in extraterrestrial phenomena, and even delved into esoteric rituals. What he uncovered was a narrative of an ancient cosmic race, visitors from the far reaches of the galaxy who for eons had been observing, learning, and sometimes interacting with Earth's inhabitants. The creature's disguise as the little girl, it seemed, was not just a ruse to deceive. It was an adaptation, a bridge to understanding humanity. Through this guise, the creature could experience human emotions, attachments, and vulnerabilities. Perhaps in its own way it was seeking a connection, a semblance of understanding in a vast and indifferent universe. Yet as the days blurred into nights, Richard's perception of reality became increasingly distorted. The boundaries between the little girl and the monstrous creature began to fluctuate. Sometimes he would see her innocent face, her eyes filled with wonder and questions. At other times, the towering alien form would dominate, its crimson eyes bearing into him. In these moments of dissonance, Richard would often question his sanity. Was he succumbing to the creature's influence? Was his mind being reshaped, molded to suit some extraterrestrial agenda? Or was he simply learning to see beyond appearances, to the essence of beings not bound by human constructs of good and evil? The journey was harrowing, and with each passing day, Richard's conviction wavered. But deep down he held on to a singular belief, that beyond the layers of fear, mistrust, and the unknown, there lay the potential for mutual understanding and compassion. Not all that roamed the cosmos with terrifying visage were monsters. Some perhaps were just lost souls seeking connection just like him. The relationship between Richard and the creature was a constantly shifting maze of emotions and realizations. As the days turned into weeks, the presence of the creature seemed to be having an increasingly profound effect on Richard's psyche. Each interaction, each attempt at understanding began to take its toll. Sleep became elusive for Richard. When he did manage to close his eyes, he was plagued by visions of otherworldly realms, of cosmic voids and infinite galaxies. These were not dreams, but rather memories, not his own, but those of the creature. It was as if the entity was sharing its own vast experiences, imprints of eons of space travel, encounters with civilizations long extinct, and the weight of cosmic solitude. Initially, Richard tried to resist, to maintain a semblance of control. He employed meditation, drugs, even exorcism in a desperate attempt to shield his mind from the alien influence, but the creature's essence was insidious, its will inexorable. Soon Richard found himself losing chunks of time, hours, then days. He'd wake up in places with no recollection of how he got there. His own reflection became alien to him, his eyes devoid of their once vibrant spark, replaced by a vacant, hollow stare. Those around him, friends and family, noticed the dramatic shift. Richard was withdrawing, not just emotionally but mentally. Conversations with him became erratic. He'd speak in tongues or respond with information far beyond any human understanding. His actions became more unpredictable, driven by an agenda that no one could decipher. The final transformation was both swift and horrifying. One evening, after a particularly intense encounter with the creature, Richard simply shut down. His body remained, but all that made Richard, his memories, emotions, desires, had been obliterated. The shell that was left behind moved with a purpose, but it wasn't driven by human consciousness. The creature had achieved its objective. Whether it was deliberate or a byproduct of its nature remained a mystery. Richard's body now served as a vessel, a conduit for the creature's will, allowing it to interact and explore the world in ways it hadn't been able to before. And as the husk that was once Richard moved through the world, those who encountered him felt a chill, an unnerving sensation that the man before them was merely a puppet, his strings pulled by something far beyond human comprehension.